What is up, guys? Randomodium here, and today we're going to be talking about some of the secrets that we can find in Piltover's lore. I'm going to be discussing the lore from every single champion from Piltover, and I will be discussing details from each story. So if you don't want any of those stories ruined, this is your spoiler warning. However, I won't be discussing Camille's lore in this video because I've already discussed it in my last video. So if you're interested in Camille's lore and learning about how Camille's family murdered all of Skarner's race, or how Camille's family is responsible for the Zon Grey, or if you're interested in the experiment that killed thousands in order to make Piltover the center of trade in Valoran, then please check out the video in the upper right hand corner. So first off, it's extremely important to note that every single story is told from the perspective of the main character. The perspective that the author gives you in these stories is not absolute truth. It is flawed, it is biased, and it's through the eyes of the character. Because of this, heroes can appear like villains, and villains can appear like heroes in these stories. It's extremely important that you realize that all of these stories we're only seeing one side of many, and the information that we're getting is flawed and incomplete. However, through some subtle clues from the authors, we can delve a bit deeper and find some truths about the world of Piltover and the characters that inhabit it. This concept is extremely prevalent in the story Progress Day. So the Progress Day story centers around Tamara, a struggling apprentice who is trying to sign a contract with one of the ruling houses of Piltover. Throughout the story, we build a relationship with her, and we're invested in her life and in her success. When she stood up to that drunk on the bridge and told him that she didn't need anyone's help and would earn her own way, I felt a great swell of pride and respect for her. And when her invention failed, I felt her disappointment. In the last act of the story, Caitlyn arrests Tamara, and we get our first glimpse at who the sheriff of Piltover is. And surprisingly, Caitlyn seems like a cold and uncaring bitch in the Progress Day story. She arrests Tamara on a hunch, burns all of Tamara's work, and then loads her onto a Shuriman ship, banishing her from the city without so much of a trial for her alleged crimes. We feel like Caitlyn is the villain in this story. It's not until the very end of the story that we find out that Tamara is actually a spy from Noxus, one of the War Masons, who infiltrate the city and map the terrain for a pending invasion. Caitlyn isn't the villain of the story. Tamara is. So with that, let's turn to Caitlyn as our first champion that we're going to delve into. So in both Caitlyn's background and also in the accompanying story about her, we see that Caitlyn is actually one of the good guys. She's actually one of the best characters in Piltover. In a city that has a lot of deceit and a lot of really horrible things going on, she really is a force for good, trying to help the weak and the powerless and trying to punish the wicked. And she's incredibly intelligent. That's one of the other great things about Caitlyn, is she's incredibly intelligent. She is a master tactician, a master hunter, and a really enjoyable and commanding heroine. The only real secret that we see in Caitlyn's lore is this last paragraph of her background, which reads, Caitlyn now works as a highly respected officer within the ranks of the Piltover Wardens, keep order in the City of Progress, particularly in areas where overzealous Hextech artisans cross the line of what is acceptable in Piltover. She has recently partnered with a new recruit from Zon, the brash and reckless Vi. How such an unlikely pairing came to be, and has proven to be so effective, is the subject of numerous wild rumors and tavern speculation among their fellow wardens and those they haul away to jail. So what this paragraph is alluding to is the infamous relationship between Caitlyn and Vi. There are a lot of people who feel that Caitlyn and Vi are actually lovers, that they're in some type of romantic relationship with each other. And this is kind of a jab at that discussion that a lot of people have on the forums. It won't outrightly confirm that Caitlyn and Vi are a couple, but the fact that the author actually puts that into the story indicates that there's some truth to the rumors. So I'm not saying for sure that Caitlyn and Vi are a romantic couple, but there's definitely something there that's more than possibly just friendship. Next up, we have Vi, and Vi is also another really likable character in the League of Legends lore. So Vi grew up in Zaun, and she was known for being brash and reckless, and being just kind of a general troublemaker and a very chaotic person. But she had a really good heart to her. Like, she never did anything that was really truly evil. She only robbed from those who could afford to lose. She never tried to beat down the people who were poor or downtrodden. She definitely wasn't a law-abiding citizen, but she wasn't heartless either. She had a conscience about her, and she tried to make sure that people didn't get hurt if they didn't need to get hurt. So in Vi's background, we find out how she came to possess her gauntlets, how they became her weapon of choice. And it happened when she decided to bring in another gang into one of her heists. And that gang did not share her enthusiasm to preserve civilian life. This gang tried to kill a lot of the miners who they viewed were, possible witnesses. And in response, Vi took the gauntlets from the golem that the other rival gang had and used that to rescue the miners and basically free them from certain death. And then Vi went on to use the gauntlets to pretty much beat the crap out of everyone in that rival gang. And here we see that Vi really is a good person. She was brought up in a really bad neighborhood. She didn't have any parents, but ultimately her heart stayed true, and she didn't let her surroundings corrupt her and make her evil. And that's what makes her such a memorable and enjoyable character. There's a couple secrets from Vi's background that we can kind of delve a little bit into. The first one reads, none of the old-timers from Vi's youth could tell her anything of her parents, with most assuming they had simply died in one of the industrial accidents that were sadly all too common in Zaun. A few vaguely claimed to have remembered her as one of the brats from Hope House, a crumbling orphanage cut into Zaun's cave-riddled cliffs. On his deathbed, a notoriously mad sump scraper claimed to have found Vi adrift in a bassinet large enough for two in the ruins of a collapsed chem laboratory. In the end, Vi gave up on any notions of learning anything about her parents, figuring that some things were best left unknown. So what's really important about this paragraph is first that they characterize this person as a notoriously mad sump scraper. They don't characterize him as somebody who's sane, somebody who's well-reasoned. They characterize him as notoriously mad, as in crazy. This is important, because this is kind of a nod that the author does not want you to take this person account seriously, but yet they do want you to take it seriously. And the next part that's really important is that the bassinet was large enough for two, but there was only one person in the bassinet, Vi. And if the bassinet is large enough for two, and the author includes that detail, you have to assume that there were two babies in that bassinet. But there was only one in the bassinet when that sump scraper found Vi. So who's the other baby? Who's the other person that could have been a sibling to Vi? Well, if you look at the splash arts, you'll see that one other champion has a background that is very similar to Vi, and that's Jayce. Jayce actually has a background in her splash art that's the destroyed version of Vi's splash art. And what I think this indicates is that Jayce is the fraternal twin of Vi. And when you think about it, it really does make sense. They really are two sides of the same coin. Both of them are extremely chaotic, reckless, but Vi has maintained her conscience, while Jayce has not. Vi is the angel on your shoulder, Jayce is the devil on your shoulder. Later on in Vi's background, we read, the former gang leader of Zaun was now in the employ of the Wardens, and she's had an upgrade. They'd replaced her chem-powered gauntlets with a pair of prototype Hex-Tech gauntlets. She also seemed somehow older, as if she'd seen and done things that had changed her forever. The Vi from the streets of Zaun, who'd use her fists before her wits, was still there. She'd grown up some and seen that the path she had been on had only one ending. No one yet knows how Vi came to be working alongside Caitlyn, but whatever secret binds them together can only be guessed at. Given the personal nature of a recent crime wave sweeping Piltover, speculation runs rife that it involves a certain blue-haired hellion from Zaun. This is another nod to Vi and Caitlyn's romantic relationship, and it's also another nod that Jinx is actually the sister of Vi, and that Vi feels a responsibility to bring Jinx to justice because they are siblings. Next up, we have Heimerdinger, and unfortunately, we didn't get that much more information on Heimerdinger. He's still the crazy, eccentric, Albert Einstein-like character that we all know and love, but we really didn't get that much more into his insights, how he came to be, or any real secrets about him. His story was really kind of short. It really just talked about how he invented something for children. He was basically trying to create a pitching machine for children, and it wound up being a weapon that was able to drive away a giant. Really kind of the interesting thing about that story is that there was one of the young Yordles who had his prototype, used it to defeat the giant. And I'm really curious to find out who that young Yordle is, if that's actually one of the other champions in the League of Legends, or whether it's just some random Yordle. But my guess is that the author wouldn't have put that in, that it was one specific Yordle who did it, unless that Yordle was somebody of importance in the League of Legends lore, like another one of the champions. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any crossovers in the champions from Bandle City that will indicate to us who was that young Yordle that used Heimerdinger's invention. Next up, we have Ziggs. And Ziggs, like Heimerdinger, doesn't have that much lore associated with him, but we do get to find out the origins of his Hex-Tech explosives. So if you read some of the other stories, you realize that Hex-Tech inventions have a propensity to explode. We saw that in the Progress Day story, and we've seen that in a couple other instances where Hex-Tech items tend to overload if they're not properly regulated or balanced, and they usually wind up blowing up. So what Ziggs realized in his kind of mad genius kind of way is that he could actually use this to his advantage and actually design Hex-Tech equipment to explode when he wanted it to and actually create bombs out of it. So that's how we got Hex-Tech explosives. It's that they were just inventions that are actually intentionally designed to blow up rather than having them unintentionally blow up. And I thought that was a really kind of clever design that they did for the champion, and it really kind of captured Ziggs' brilliance in his own way. So the next champion we're going to talk about is Ezreal, and Ezreal has not only his background lore, but he also has a story associated with him. And Ezreal is basically just an explorer. He's got that wanderlust that he got from his parents. His parents were both explorers as well. And the story kind of indicates that Ezreal's parents are most likely dead. They just never came back. And he kind of followed in their footsteps trying to find them. And where Ezreal found the amulet that he uses for all of his abilities, in his lore it reads, in the underground crypt of a long-deceased emperor, Ezreal noticed the mosaic tiles covering the floor were perfectly smooth, as if they had been added only recently. He eagerly chipped away at a corner of the floor, revealing the edge of a portrait which had long faded from its original bright colors. Ezreal removed each tile with growing excitement. He uncovered an enormous fresco of the man with Nizuk's characteristic curling horns protruding from his head. The mage's gaping mouth opened into a sinkhole of churning sand. Ezreal secured a rope and dove in, blindly feeling his way around the tomb until his lungs begged for air. He emerged wearing a heavy bronze gauntlet, with a bright azure amulet inlaid in its center. This is how Ezreal found the amulet where he draws a lot of his power, both to phase shift and also to fire his blasts of energy. Towards the end of Ezreal's lore, we read, "The relic was not without its limits, however. It took long moments to recharge its power and only allowed for teleportation between short distances. Worse, Ezreal could not help but feel that if his parents were still alive, he would not have found the gauntlet at all. Unbeknownst to him, the glove had a twin that had been excavated from the tomb years before. Ezreal vowed to carry on his parents' tradition of exploring the world and chasing the thrills of the unknown." So the importance of this lore is that there is a second amulet. There's actually some clues as to what this second amulet is in Jayce's lore. So naturally, the next champion we have to talk about is Jayce. And Jayce is really kind of a pretentious, arrogant, extremely intelligent individual. But he's not a completely deplorable human being. He has his flaws, he has horrible social skills and social graces, but he really is a good person deep down. Like, he really does want to try and do the right thing and hopefully improve the world around him. One of the biggest things that we see from Jayce's lore is this passage. "As Jayce studied in solitude, Clan Geoparra's explorers discovered a raw blue crystal deep within the Shuriman Desert. Though Jayce volunteered to experiment on it, specifically by suggesting that the clan's other scholars wouldn't be smart enough to get anything out of it, his lack of tact in doing so prompted Clan Geoparra to give it to the better-mannered scholars as a form of punishment. Yet, after many months, the scholars reached a unanimous conclusion. The crystal was worthless, a power-drained hunk of rock. The disappointed clan leaders finally handed the crystal over to Jayce, assuming that even he, with his remarkable intelligence, wouldn't be able to learn anything from it. I think that this crystal is the twin crystal to Ezreal's gauntlet that he has. However, the only thing that really supports this is that both of them were found in the Shuriman Desert, and both of them are blue. In Ezreal's lore, it's described as azure, and then in Jayce's lore, it's described as blue, but they're basically the same color, so they could very much be twins. Jayce's lore continues with Victor basically attacking Jayce and stealing the crystal away from him because it's a very powerful power source. And it kind of paints Victor as a madman. He wants to try and create these automatons that have no free will but are quote-unquote perfect. But we really have to remember that this is from Jayce's perspective. From Jayce's perspective, Victor is a madman. But that doesn't mean that Victor is objectively a madman. That doesn't mean that Victor actually is a madman. He may have very good reasons for what he's doing that we don't know yet because we haven't seen Victor's story. We haven't seen things through his perspective. It makes sense that Jayce would think that Victor is a madman, but it doesn't mean that Victor actually is insane or evil or any of the things that Jayce thinks he is. And it's really interesting because it seems like the League of Legends writers are kind of setting up Jayce and Victor to kind of be the Mr. Fantastic and Doctor Doom of the League of Legends universe. If you guys don't know from Marvel Comics, Mr. Fantastic and Doctor Doom are both really brilliant scientists, and then Doctor Doom had, an accident which caused him to become disfigured, and he turned evil and tried to take over the world, while Mr. Fantastic got all the credit and became a good guy. If you delve deeper into Doctor Doom's psychology, he's not like an evil person. He doesn't do evil things just for evil's sake. He always has a reason behind what he does. And the big reason why he does the evil things is he feels that the means justifies the end. He's always going towards a bigger goal. And sometimes he does really horrible things to achieve his goals, but he feels that he is justified in doing that. Mr. Fantastic, however, doesn't feel that way. He doesn't feel like the means justify the end. He feels like you shouldn't have to do something evil to get a good outcome in the end. You should do good things, and that should hopefully result in a good outcome in the end. So this is the dichotomy between Jayce and Victor. Victor is willing to do anything in the name of progress, what he defines as progress. And Jayce is not. Jayce retains his humanity and retains his conscience and is not willing to put people through suffering or take away their free will, while Victor is willing to do that for the greater good. The quote-unquote greater good. Another really interesting nod in Jayce's story is this little passage right here. He stood in his workshop, bathed in sun rays from his skylight, surrounded by dozens of artifacts of his own genius. Gearwork boots that could cling to any surface, a knapsack with articulated limbs that always kept the user's tools within easy reach. Greater than all these inventions, however, was the weapon that Jayce now held in his hands. I think this is a nod to some other Marvel characters, namely Spider-Man and also Dr. Octopus. And I think this is a clever nod from the writers to kind of acknowledge Marvel's influence in their writing style. We've got the Mr. Fantastic Doctor Doom thing going on between Jayce and Victor, and now we even got these boots that can cling to any surface, just like Spider-Man can, and we've got this knapsack with articulated limbs that looks very similar to Dr. Octopus's arms. So I thought that was really interesting. Maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but I really think that there are some strong influences from Marvel Comics coming into the League of Legends lore. And finally, we come to Orianna. She's the last champion we're going to talk about, and her lore is probably my favorite out of all of them. It is such a well-written piece of literature. Both her background and also her story are so heartfelt. They make you feel so deeply for this champion. And it's really strange because this champion is the least human out of all the champions in Piltover. She's pretty much entirely all machine. And yet my heart felt for her deeper than probably any of the other champions that we discussed so far today. And for those of you who don't know, Orianna's tale, it's a story about her. She was a very well-off girl in Piltover, the only child of her father. And she wanted to help people. She wanted to build things. She was really good at tinkering. And there was a really bad accident in Zaun which released these really nasty chemicals. And against her father's wishes, Orianna went down into Zaun to try and help people, to try and fix, their breathing apparatuses and try and treat the wounded. And what's really sad is that Orianna noticed a child who didn't have any type of breathing apparatus. And Orianna didn't have any left. So what did Orianna do? She gave the child her breathing apparatus. And Orianna thought she was going to be safe, but she got infected by the toxic chemicals, and they started eating her alive, basically. They started eating away her lungs, they started eating away all of her other organs. And her father couldn't bear to let her die, so every time one of her organs failed, he replaced it with a mechanical version, until the only thing that was left was her heart. That was the only organ left that she had that had not been replaced by something mechanical. And then her father got sick. And Orianna realized that the only way that she could save her father is if she gave her father her heart, basically gave her father a heart transplant. So Orianna created an artificial heart and put her artificial heart into herself, took out her own heart, basically surrendering the last of her humanity, and gave that to her father so her father could live. It's a really touching story. It's a really beautiful story. And then furthermore, when you get into Orianna's additional story that's included with her, we see that Orianna's ball has really kind of its own personality, which is really interesting because they never really talked about that before. That the ball has its own personality and that she interacts with the ball and they have this dialogue between each other is fantastic. The ball kind of communicates non-vocally, which is really great. It's like a little puppy dog almost. And the story that Orianna encounters is she's trying to find someone who's like her, and she finds this boy in this amusement park, and she thinks that this boy has consciousness, and she tries to take him away, and she actually fights off some guards trying to rescue him. And then she finds out that it's just a trick, that the boy has pre-scripted lines, that he's not really alive, he's not really intelligent, and you just feel so sad for her. You feel like she's all alone in the world. And it's just a really touching story. I think Orianna is actually one of my favorite champions now because of this lore. Um, it's such a fantastically written piece of literature. It's very short, but it's incredibly sweet. Within Orianna's lore, there's also one of the biggest secrets I feel like out of all of these champions. And if we read this paragraph, it reads, though she seldom ventured beyond her neighborhood, Orianna often stole away to the theater, where she watched dancers portray stories through leaps and pirouettes from lands beyond Piltover. Epic adventures unfolded before her eyes. An ageless man who wandered the desert in search of a spell he'd lost a century ago. A maiden who disguised herself as a rock in a magic-infused jungle. A pilgrim who longed to climb an impossibly tall mountain that healed all who ascended its peak. And dozens more stories of faraway places that thrilled her imagination. So what's really interesting about this is we know who the first person they're talking about is. It's obviously Rise, an ageless man who's wandering the desert in search of a spell he's lost a century ago. That's obviously Rise. And then the third one, a pilgrim who longed to climb an impossibly tall mountain that healed all who ascended its peak. So that is definitely one of the Targonian champions. Most likely Taric, because it specifically says that he's a pilgrim, and Taric is the only Targonian champion who wasn't native to Targon. He's actually a Demacian. All the other Targonian champions are from the mountain itself. So it's most likely Taric that they're talking about in this story. However, the middle one, a maiden who disguised herself as a rock in a magic-infused jungle. That doesn't describe any of the champions we have in League of Legends. The only champions that are really rock related are Wukong, I believe. He was born out of a rock. Malphite, who's obviously a rock, and then Talia. And that description doesn't match any of those three champions. So I have to believe that this is a nod to a future champion, a champion that's in the works, some additional rock champion or some type of deceiver champion that can disguise her appearance, maybe in the terrain, like she can mold into the terrain possibly as one of her abilities. So I'm really curious to see what's in store for us in the future. But I'm actually 100% certain that this is a nod to a future champion in League of Legends. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope that I explained myself really well. And if I missed anything in the lore, please leave a comment. Let me know about something I missed, because I absolutely love this lore. I'm trying to catch all the little details I can, but I'm sure a couple of them have slipped through the cracks. So definitely leave your comments below on things that you picked up on in the lore. And then if you want to see more videos like this, if you want to see more lore-related videos, definitely hit that like button and definitely hit that subscribe button so you can come back and watch some more of my videos. I hope you all have a great day. This is Randomonium signing off.